Hello, my darlings. Hello, 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 and good morning. Very good morning. A very early morning on a Sunday. Well, it's not too early. It's 8:30. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to start this very, very sort of hands-off stream. I'm not even like on camera, as you can see, because I'm actually getting ready to go to Speaker's Corner later on today. So if you guys are out and about, make sure you're subscribed to Hafez Reflects at Hafez Reflects in the YouTube search, and you will see my ugly face. And please subscribe to that in order to catch me live at Speaker's Corner or on the streets of London, because there's a couple of other events. At least there's one other event that's happening at Parliament Square, which I will be going to. So, what are we doing, boys and girls? The reason I started this particularly early live stream this morning is just so I can play this. I've been wanting to show my audience this video of Andrew Doyle doing this wonderful, wonderful interview for quite some time now, and I've just not been able to get around to it. So I thought I'd do this now, let it run. Once it's finished, I will then rush out the door and pretty much just get down to London. So for now, I am going to now bring up this video and play this video of a wonderful interview of Andrew Doyle with a gentleman called Dan Saves America, I believe. Bear with me. Let me get it ready. Going. Yes, it's Dad Saves America. Wonderful interview, really interesting, really insightful. So it's not really more of a review or a recap or review of it. I'm just going to play the interview more or less straight because it's just fascinating. Yep.
Andrew Doyle, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this is an extra special surprise because we just met and it was like, oh wait,
Just the other day.
we've got all this set up. You
Yeah.
gotta come on in.
Yeah, very convenient.
So I quickly reacquainted myself with Tatiana, your
Or Titania.
Or
but
Titania.
Americans can't pronounce it. Fine. It's
well, the guilty as charged. Yeah. So let's start off for those who aren't familiar with your work. What was that?
that was just something I invented about 6 years ago to try an attempt, I suppose, to satirize woke culture at a time when it just didn't feel like comedians were touching it. So I was a bit annoyed at that. And also, I was just doing it to entertain myself. You had lots of people online, particularly Twitter, lots of social justice activists berating other people for their privilege, but they themselves were often quite rich. So that's why Titania is a rich white girl who, you know, has everything handed to her on a plate, and she just wants to hector everyone else, and she would like to see any opinions that dissent from her own censored. She would like people to lose their jobs. So you're kind of standard social justice activist who sort of, I suppose, wants to achieve their goals through authoritarian means. That's what it is.
All right, I'll keep this quick. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our new content as it comes out every week. And now, back to the conversation. You had said that there was a surprising prescient nature to a lot of your seemingly crazy posts as far as them. So let's go through a couple of those.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can see there's a thread. There's a thread on Titania's account. I can't remember. It's where she talks about the original posts that she did and then the ones that came true. And there's a surprising number of them. There's about 15, I think, and there's more that I've seen since. You know, she would talk about how Helen Keller, although she couldn't see or hear, was still guilty of white privilege. And then there was an article in a major American publication saying the same thing about 3 years later. Similarly, she did a post about Mary Poppins, about the scene with chimney soot on the face, claiming this was blackface and therefore this film should be cancelled. And then the New York Times wrote an article saying the same thing about a year later. So it was as though the most extreme things, you know, she said that babies shouldn't have gendered names on their birth certificates because they should wait until they're old enough to, you know, or their sex indicated on their birth certificates, so they should wait and decide later on. And then that appeared in a major medical journal that we should dispense with biological sex designations and birth certificates. So it just takes a while, because I guess the most, once you get your head inside the sort of intersectional, identity obsessed, critical social justice movement, when you sort of delve into how they think, you can kind of anticipate where they're going to go with it. And the other thing about them is they can problematize anything as racist. So at the moment, the countryside is racist. That's something they're saying in the UK at the moment, that our sort of meadows and fields are inherently exclusionary to black people. But I know black people who are happy to walk in a meadow. You know, they're not prevented.
What does that even mean? Are they what does that mean? I've heard the same thing, that hiking in the US is racist because not as many African Americans.
I mean, it's as simple as that. You know,
skiing's obviously racist.
Well, if you're,
the white snow, of course.
If you're in the UK, in an area like the Lake District, I suppose the majority population is white there. So most people walking about are going to be white. That's all it is. But they've interpreted that through the lens of DEI, through the lens of equity, and have said, well, this must be some kind of systemic racism. And of course, in the UK, whenever this is challenged, there's a big reaction. I blame you for this, because it is an American phenomenon, the critical rate. You personally, because it is an American phenomenon. There was for instance, there was a study called the Commission for Race and Ethnic Disparities study in the UK, which forensically examined the notion of whether or not there was, in fact, some kind of systemic racism within the major educational institutions in the UK. It was looking at whether effectively education is rigged against minorities. And what it found is there is absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. You know, for instance, in the UK, children from Caribbean backgrounds tend to perform less well than white kids. But children from black African backgrounds perform better than white kids. So if this is a system of racism, it's very, very targeted against a particular type of black individual. So obviously the evidence showed it just wasn't there. And the reason it's not there is because Britain is not a racist country. There is racism, there are racists. You will find that wherever you find human beings. But it's not generally a racist country insofar as to say something racist openly in the UK makes you something of a pariah. You know, we've reached that point. Yeah. It's so, this idea that it's some kind of hellish racist hellhole, simply not backed up by the data. But people got very angry about this. They started comparing the chair of the commission to Joseph Goebbels and the KKK. This, by the way, is...
you have to immediately go to the Nazis.
You do.
It's the only place to go. It's the only door that's... Every door leads to...
Straight away. They're straight there.
It's like, what's in this door? Hitler.
And I would question the optics of calling a black man, or comparing a black man to the KKK. You know, this is Tony Sewell, who was the head of the chair of the commission. You know, comparing him, a black guy, to the KKK, I think it's just, well, kind of racist. And it's also mostly white people doing this, mostly sort of privileged white people who are getting angry about it. So it just goes to show that these are the kind of things I was trying to satirize through her, but it just got worse and worse. I actually think it's much worse now than it was when I started.
Yeah, so it's, when did you start? Because I think the book came out. That you penned, was that woke? Was that 2018? That's like it feels like a whole lifetime.
I know. The book came out in 2019 in March. I'd been tweeting at her for about a year, since April of 2018. So yeah, that's like 6 years ago, isn't it? And the book still feels, well, not just relevant, it feels like it's more relevant, which is horrible, because I kind of felt at the time this will be over in a couple of years.
Yeah, there's been a lot of like,
exacerbated it.
Are we at peak woke? What do you think?
Everyone says that every now and then it just gets worse, doesn't it? So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
One of the things I was excited to talk about is, you know, you're a comic in the UK. It does seem like this gender ideology and the leading lights, if you can call them that, of it, are American. And it seems like the Anglosphere has adopted this nonsense most vigorously.
Yeah.
You know, Canada, nuts. Australia, New Zealand, nuts. Yeah. And you guys are arresting people for tweets.
Yeah.
So not great. What's your take on that? Is it like American cultural hegemony? What is going on?
Peter Boghossian ties it to the English language. He says that the woke virus spreads much quicker when mediated through the language of English. I'm not 100% sure about that. I mean, it is interesting that some of the lexicon of the critical social justice movement doesn't get translated. So the book Woke by Titania McGrath, when it was translated into various other languages, they retained the word woke as the title, even in places like Hungary and, wherever it might be, Portugal or Spain or whatever. So he might have a point there. But I think there is something about cultures that have taken their freedoms for granted that enables this kind of thing to flourish, because I don't see, anyone who's from an authoritarian state or somewhere that has experienced that kind of state oppression doesn't go out calling for restrictions on their free speech. I think in order to do that, you have to have taken it for granted. You have to be a bit pampered. I think we're just, that's our culture, isn't it? We are kind of, we've got nothing to complain about. It's never been better. I mean, the idea of free speech and freedom generally is so rare. It's a historical and global aberration. It doesn't normally happen. The fact that we have it is unusual in the grand scheme of things, right? And so I think it's very easy, once you've grown up within that culture, once you've never experienced hardship, once you've never experienced people trying to take your freedom away, it's very easy to call. It's so you don't see it anymore. It's like that joke about the two fish in the water, and one says, "Oh, the water's lovely today," and the other fish says, "Well, what's water?" Because they can't see it. I think it was who was it who wrote Infinite Jest? Dave Foster Wallace. I think it was him who said that. But the idea there, we are so used to freedom, we're saturated with freedom, that we don't see it anymore. And that's why you have kids on university campuses saying, please censor speech, please restrict us, please make sure we are protected from Halloween costumes. It's whatever it might be. That comes from...
Was it Yale?
That was at Yale, yeah. Where they surrounded the professor and started berating and screaming at him because he wanted them to have their freedom.
This is our home. We need this to be a safe space. You're my dad.
They should have been kicked out straight away. It doesn't make sense to me why they weren't just expelled immediately. You can't shout at a member of staff in that way and bully them in that way, because that's exactly what it was.
There is something about bureaucracy that seems to attract and reward cowardice.
Okay.
I don't know what I don't know if it's just like the way you survival is success in a bureaucracy like a college administration, where if I can just keep my head down and not lose my job, I'll eventually be the dean.
Yeah, well, there is something to that. I think particularly in the current culture, people don't like to rock the boat because of the dominance of the managerial class, HR, those kind of departments who are implementing these kind of EDI policies. If you stand up and say, actually, no, I don't want you doing that. I'm not going to sit through an unconscious bias training session because my employer does not have the right to probe inside my brain. And also every single study into them shows that they're completely ineffective. So what's the point? If you raise that even to raise that objection, it just means you won't get promoted the next time there's an opportunity for promotion.
Right.
I used to be a school teacher, so I've got friends who are still in teaching, and they send me messages all the time. They send me screenshots of training sessions they are having to take, things that they're, books that they're having to teach, which are just dreadful books, but they tick certain diversity boxes. And unconscious bias training. Because one teacher friend sent me a message during an unconscious bias training session, and my feeling was, why don't you stand up and say, this is ridiculous, I'm not doing this anymore? And of course, if he did, he jeopardizes his career. So it's not, I don't think I understand what you mean by cowardice, but on the other hand, it's not trivial to lose your job.
Oh no, for sure not.
And I think that is a potential, I'm very privileged in this way. I can say what the hell I like. I can't get fired for these opinions. But if I was still a teacher, well, I wouldn't be, let's say I wouldn't be escalating through the ranks very quickly, and I might even lose my job probably.
What grade, what subject did you teach?
English literature. Well, I was actually a part-time lecturer at Oxford when I was doing my doctorate, and I was going into academia, and then I decided not to do that and go to stand-up instead, which is ridiculous.
What was the trigger of this? You're in academia, you're in Oxford, you're getting your doctorate, and you're like, nah.
There's a few things. I had a supervisor called Robin Robbins who was one of those old dons at Oxford, and he had the big room with the massive old books and the leather armchairs and everything. And he said to me, just whatever you do, don't become an academic, because you'll end up running around as an old man, running around the quad, screaming, why have I wasted my life? So he was quite blunt about that.
And that was him. He was like, "I'm saying because I."
Oh yeah,
my life.
he was basically he'd spent,
I'm a miserable person.
Well, he wasn't really, but he'd spent when I met him, he'd been working for almost 20 years on an edition of John Donne's poetry. So that's proper academia. You focus on one thing for a long time and you get it done. Prior to that, he'd spent 20 years working on Thomas Brown's Pseudodoxia Epidemica, big 2-volume edition. It's a definitive edition. And if you look at his edition of John Donne, it is definitive. It's 2 huge volumes. The notes are copious. Every possible aspect is chased, but it takes decades of work to do that kind of thing. And he said it drives you mad. And I also realized, because I was working a lot with early modern manuscripts, I learned how to read 16th century handwriting, working on the manuscripts at the Bodleian Library. And there's a particular area of the Bodleian Library in Oxford called the Duke Humphreys Room. And you might have seen it if you've ever seen the Harry Potter films. It's the library in the Harry Potter films where they have the books chained.
So magnificent space.
Well, yeah, but also bleak and shadowy and difficult to get a seat near to the sunlight and full of doddery people who've driven themselves mad through the dust of knowledge, and and you realize that actually I'm going to get rickets in here. I'm not going to get any vitamin D. If you're just doing that, and I didn't want that. And I was also at the time doing stand-up in London, and so that was appealing to me more. So I moved to London. I was putting on plays in the pub theatre. An elderly woman came to see the plays, liked them, and she invited me to live with her for free so that I could write. So she sort of fulfilled the function of a patron. Then I had no money at all, and I was, and then when I ran out of money, I thought, well, I'm not qualified for anything. I've got a doctorate in Renaissance poetry. I can't do anything with that. So I became a school teacher. That was the only thing I could think to do.
That, were you a good teacher?
Depends on who you ask. I think I was a good teacher for the very smart kids. So I was very good at pushing them further and that kind of thing. I was a very bad teacher for the thick kids, the kids who weren't very bright. I don't mean to be mean, but it's a fact. And because I would run out of patience, I didn't have the patience. I remember trying to explain the use of apostrophes to one boy for about 20 minutes. And he said, I don't understand what you mean. And I actually said to him, I've done all I can. This is so easy that if you can't get it at this point, you will never get it. Now, a teacher should never say that. So I was clearly not right. I should
no,
be far
probably
more
not.
But it does aggravate me. I mean, apostrophes aggravate me. Adults can't use apostrophes. It takes you 5 minutes. Just Google it. There's a few basic rules. It's so easy. There's no excuse. They should be in prison.
How very English of you.
Yeah. Well, I think I've got a point.
Fair enough. Why? So you called yourself a liberal. How do you describe your philosophy?
Okay. It's complicated, isn't it? Because in America, liberal means something different. Well, I mean, I think to Americans, they see liberal as synonymous with left wing or Democrat. When British people use it, they're talking about old school liberalism, probably best defined by Locke or Mill, perhaps or Areopagitica by Milton. Or if you read John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, it sort of summarizes what we mean by liberal, which is, individual autonomy, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, being able to do whatever you wish to do or say whatever you wish to say, right up until the point where you encroach on the rights of someone else. I mean, that's pretty much what Mill says. So that's what we mean by liberal. But then you go to Australia and the Liberal Party is the Conservative Party, and over here it's the left. So right. it's so I think there is a lot of confusion about it. Whenever I post about liberalism online, I often get Americans assuming I mean left wing and getting angry about it. And so every time you have to explain what you actually mean by liberal. So it's a definitional quagmire, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think today in America, the easiest word to use, we're here in Las Vegas for Freedom Fest, would be libertarian.
Yes. But then
but that's also got some things that are maybe not quite the same as classical liberal.
No, it's
like a subset, perhaps.
In Britain, when you think of libertarian, you think of economics more than anything. Yeah, I don't even know if that is particularly satisfactory. I'm going to still use liberalism. I'm just going to be very clear about my definition when I use it. I think that's probably the best way.
I mean, I think one way to think about it is towards a free and open society, which I know actually is like I think that's the name of George Soros's foundation, the Free and Open Society. So there's no words that can't be captured and contorted to suit whatever we want.
So you can't just dispense with the words simply because they've been problematized, you know? I mean, this is what the woke do. You know, they even, you know, they self-described as woke, and then they decided, you know, around 2018 that anyone using the word woke was using it as a snarl word. It was an invention of the right to attack their worldview, even though 10 minutes ago they were using it about themselves. You know, and they just sort of change the meaning of words, redefining words as they go along and denying that they're doing so. Sort of an elaborate form of gaslighting.
One of the things that I've always found interesting, at least in American politics, is both sides, to the extent there's two, which there isn't two, but, you know, there is leanings in their political camps will say the same things about their deficiencies.
Right.
That, like, no matter which side it is, you will hear the same complaint when you're among friends. We aren't doing a good job getting our message out there. We're so disorganized. The other side is so disciplined.
Yeah.
You know, both sides say this. I've seen it in both instances. Does that play out in the UK in the same way? The sort of the way the sort of partisan politics, or are they more? Is it different?
It's a different situation, I think, because in the UK there isn't that much between the Conservatives and Labour. They're not really all that different. They're not really authentically left-wing or right-wing. I would go so far as to say maybe the culture will killed off left and right. Maybe those are hangovers from the French Revolution. Maybe we don't need those anymore. I think that it's too widely misinterpreted. I mean, for instance, in the UK, people often suggest that it is a right-wing view to be anti-woke and a left-wing view to be woke, and yet all of the worst excesses of the woke movement over the past 12 years have been presided over by conservatives, by the right. This has all happened under their watch.
Yeah.
This is a movement that infects left and right. It's if you're seeing this in terms of left and right, you aren't seeing it. I think that's the point. So I would say there's still a place for party politics if there could be some kind of authenticity to that politics. You know, if the Conservatives were actually conservative, they would not, for instance, have been responsible for the levels of mass migration into the UK that they have been. Even though in their manifesto they said they were going to reduce the numbers. They've done far more things regarding that than any other party has ever done. The left, similarly, if Labour were genuinely a left-wing body, they would be more supportive of the working classes. Labour has become an irredeemably middle-class political party, but it's called Labour. So the clue's in the name. And then we have another party called the Liberal Democrats, who are neither liberal nor democratic. They were explicitly trying to overturn the 2016 Brexit vote. In fact, their leader, Nick Clegg, who now works for Facebook, actually wrote a book called How to Stop Brexit. Why not call that How to Stop Democracy? Because that's effectively what he was talking about. And yet he hailed from the Liberal Democrats. So when you have political parties who claim to be one thing but they're nothing of the kind, and it just becomes a kind of amorphous blob, which means that everyone's pretty much politically homeless at this point. I mean, for me, I don't support any of them. The closest I have in my country is a party called the SDP. But...
I've heard of the SDP, but that's not... Well,
yeah,
what is that party?
Yeah, well, they're social democrats. They believe in... I suppose, how would you describe them? They're quite economically left-wing, and they're quite socially conservative, which is quite a traditional thing for those on the left. If you go back to George Orwell, for instance,
right?
If you read, you know, well, The Lion and the Unicorn, for instance, or even some aspects of The Road to Wigan Pier, he's obviously got a very social conservative worldview, but he's also very, very much on the left. He's also willing to criticize tyranny on the left, as he did in Animal Farm. So, you know, that
he had a blind spot that maybe he didn't. Orwell's so interesting in that he had diagnosed the true evil nature of authoritarianism so effectively, so presciently, and yet he still would call himself a socialist.
Yes, but again, this is definitional problems, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. He was so on it with Animal Farm. I mean, to the extent that they wouldn't publish it at first. It took a year for it to get published because they said, you know, we're at war at the moment. You're having a go at our allies, and it's quite explicit. Yeah, I was, because I live quite near to where he lived in England, and during the pandemic, actually, I used to go for walks in the country, and there was a particular village I used to walk to, and I didn't realise, but until afterwards, that I was walking to Orwell's house, the house that he lived in that village, and then walking back, but I hadn't noticed the blue plaque on the wall. I didn't realize that just where I was walking to, there's a place called Manor Farm, which is of course the farm from Animal Farm, and he was writing that book while he was living there. None of this I didn't connect until ages later.
Amazing, actually.
It's kind of amazing, yeah. Yeah, he was hitting on a number of things. I mean, I think one of the best things people can do is read his essays. I think they are tremendous, and they're not just obviously relating to politics, although he had a particular bugbear about tyranny. He also had a particular bugbear about the use of language, journalistic language, the way the middle class elites misuse language. He was also very good on literature. He's got a fantastic essay about Dickens. I think he's wrong about art. He used to say that all art is propaganda, and I think that's actually wrong. But I think he makes a persuasive case for it. But yeah, he was wonderful at diagnose because he'd seen it. He fought the fascists. He had a bullet through the throat doing so. He was there, so he knows what fascism is. That's a great start. In fact, he's got an essay where he bewails the fact that people don't understand what fascism means, and it's a kind of catch-all term that can be thrown about promiscuously. It's almost, I mean, that could be written. That sentence could be written today. But even back then, people didn't really know what it was. He had a real handle on tyranny, and he understood that the tyrannical impulse is not party political. There is something about the human instinct, I think, and this also, I think, explains the success of the woke movement. I think there's something about humanity that lends ourselves instinctively to authoritarianism, which means that I think in every successive generation you have to resist it. You have to restate the case for freedom, because, and it's also suggestive of the significance of civilization. I think what we mean by civilization is that sort of patina we construct, that scaffolding that we produce to resist those tyrannical impulses. You know, because everyone, as a child, you know, if someone's annoyed you, you just want to hit them or you want to get rid of them. And that's what tyrants do. Yeah. And I think when you go through to adulthood and you still retain that impulse, it means you haven't been effectively socialized or civilized. And that's why I think civilization is so important. That's why I think the preservation of great art is so important. That's why I'm probably quite socially conservative when it comes to, you know, I've never considered myself on the right, but when it comes to art, when it comes to education, I have very old-fashioned views, as Orwell did, because he understood that you can't have anything unless you preserve the best of the past.
How do you understand, both from Orwell, but also for yourself, what fascism actually means? Because the one thing about the history of that, in my limited attempts to understand it, is that you have a couple different threads, one of which being Mussolini and his attempt to articulate it. And his articulation, which actually got the New Dealers and FDR quite excited. They liked it. The FDR was properly understood as a kind of Mussolini fascist.
Yes.
You know, the mixing of big government and big corporate power, corporatism, dirigista, sort of this heavy hand of the state in private affairs, even if it's nominally private, but it's like, you know, like our healthcare system is definitionally a fascist healthcare system.
And the efficiency of it. You know, I mean, at the time there was that famous phrase, "Oh, they get the trains to run on time." You know,
right?
You know, so there's no.
We've lost whatever efficiency there was to be had at some point. We've long ago gotten past that. But how do you understand what fascism is?
Yeah, well, I suppose yes, and I understand that it is complicated, but I think you reduce it to its basics, right? You reduce it to what Mussolini and Hitler had in common, which is the idea of suppressing political opposition through paramilitary means, through violence, suppressing free speech and freedom of the press, which of course is the first thing that the Nazis did when they came to power. And those are, I think, the key, and in enforcing your worldview onto the populace. Those things are the shared characteristics of fascism, combined with, and quite importantly, I think, combined with a sense of racial superiority, supremacy. Those things, I think, without those ingredients, I don't think you have a fascist. But those things sort of speak to fascism. But it's interesting what you mentioned about, you know, Hitler being on the cover of Time magazine, Man of the Year or whatever, you know, or at the time, you know, people often go back and say, oh, this person supported Hitler, this person you've got to remember the context. People didn't know what they would become. You know, there's people often in the UK, because the Daily Mail, which is the right-wing tabloid, supported the Black Shirts, Otto Mosey's Black Shirts, the fascist group in England. And a lot of the left-wingers like to say, oh, look, you've always been fascist. But of course, the Mirror also supported the fascists, and the Mirror is a left-wing paper. So you've got to contextualize it historically, I think. But yeah, that's how my understanding of fascism is, those key ingredients. And that's why I really deplore the misuse of the term. If you're calling someone a fascist because they think that human beings cannot change sex, then you don't know what fascism means.
What do you understand to be the end of fascism? So if communism's end is a world without difference, let's
Yes.
say, in some notion, that a kind of utopia in which there is a post-scarcity equality of outcomes. That's one way to think about it.
Yes, yes.
So we abolish property. We are all owning everything and each other in common in perfect equality.
Yeah.
What is the positive end, as you understand it, for people who would rightly be fascist?
The positive end, I suppose, would be an elimination of all those deemed to be impure. I think that's where
it's
it comes
moving
from.
towards a kind of perfection of
Yes.
your society.
Which involves, in the case of Hitler, the massacre of Jews, which involves the killing of the disabled, anyone who's not Aryan. It's perfectly clear what his end goal was, but what his fantasy was. And that also included a lust for expansionism that could not be quenched, which effectively was his undoing, of course.
Does that racial purity extend to Franco in Spain and Mussolini in Italy in the same ways? Is that truly a kind of a thread that binds them together, or not as
much, is it? Not as much.
No.
But I take that point. But I think, given that we are talking about the Third Reich as being the sort of apotheosis of fascism in the 20th century, I think that's an important detail to retain, isn't it? I think it's kind of key.
It seems like, and it's useful and to linger on this because of how much this word is thrown around today by the identitarians.
Yes.
That it seems like fascism is somewhat of an incoherent catch-all. It doesn't have the coherence of either a classical liberalism or communism. It's got this, it's nationalistic. Like, it seems like a lot of the skirmishes of the 20th century between
Yes.
the communists and the fascists were really between international revolutionaries and nationalists. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Well, the ambiguity of the term is helpful for those who use it, insofar as what everyone does agree on, whether we're talking about the minutiae of what different fascist regimes believe. What everyone agrees on is that fascism has been defeated, as in fascism is evil. Mm-hmm. I think there is a consensus on that. And you rarely reach those kind of consensuses, but we've got that in the way that we have a consensus that slavery is wrong.
Yes.
Right? So we don't have debates about the wrongs and rights of fascism, right? There's no need, because everyone agrees that fascism is wrong. So therefore you have a word, you have something you can brand someone else with.
That's just bad.
It's like calling them Satan or evil. It's almost like a theological term in that way. It's saying this individual is not really a human. This individual is a monster, and that disobliges me from having to speak to them or engage with their ideas in any way. So by misusing the term fascism, by branding anyone who you disagree with as fascist, it effectively puts them outside of the Overton window, and it means that no discussion is required and no consideration of their ideas are required. Now, this is very important if your belief system is not sustainable through analysis. So let's take the phrase trans women are women. It is a fact that no human being has ever changed sex. That is an incontrovertible fact. So if your entire belief system is predicated on the belief that people can change sex, then you're in trouble, because it won't survive the light of scrutiny. So what do? You say, we must not discuss with those who disagree, and anyone who disagrees is a fascist. And that's a remarkably effective technique, because nobody wants to be called a fascist. And that's exactly what they did quite explicitly. I mean, in the UK, we have a body called Stonewall, obviously based on the Stonewall riots of 1969 in New York. That's where the name is taken from. But this was the foremost charity, gay rights charity in the UK, who pivoted in 2015 into trans rights. And they had an official policy called no debate. And their policy is we don't discuss. Either you agree with our ideas or you don't get a seat at the table. And that's how they've done this. And that's how trans ideology has spread so rapidly through the UK. Because anyone who said, hang on a minute, women should have their own single-sex spaces, men should not be in women's sports, men should not be in women's prisons. All of those people were branded as fascists, or evil, or bigoted, or transphobe, or TERF, which is, of course, the modern equivalent of witch. And once branded, those people, it got very difficult for us to reach the point we've got. I mean, we've had a breakthrough recently because of Hilary Cass's review into pediatric gender care, which has thrown a real grenade in the gender ideology movement.
And the reveal of Michael Schellenberger was with us just earlier today, and the WPATH files, which is just absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, same thing. You know, you've got the WPATH files, which their latest standards of care, version 8, includes a chapter on eunuch identity. It promotes the idea that if you want to remove your genitals, that is a form of gender identity that requires respect in a civilized society, and that medical practitioners ought to be encouraged to castrate their patients if they are innately eunuchs. And this is kind of insane. And
I don't want to laugh at that because there's nothing funny about it, but innately, I am a eunuch. It's 400 AD. I'm a eunuch.
Right, and this exactly. You're not working for a harem on behalf of the Sultan. You know, you're not a countertenor at the Vatican. You know, but this is it's a real problem, that, because also WPATH is an activist group that masquerades as being the world's global experts on gender pediatric care, or gender medicine as they call it. But yet here they are talking about eunuchs. Not only that, in the draft version of the Standards of Care version 8, there were links to a website, a fetish eunuch website, which included short stories about the castration of children for sexual pleasure. And that was uploaded to the NHS Scotland website in the UK. So you have an activist body which is promoting effectively written child pornography, sadomasochistic castration porn, linked directly to a WPATH official document, which is then uploaded by our National Health Service. This is why this is very, very disturbing. If you want to know more about that, you should look at a website called Redux, which is a feminist website that has done some investigation into this. It's a very, very dark area. It's very disturbing. But this is where we go when we allow activists to masquerade as experts. They're not experts. They're ideologues, and they've got no place in medicine.
This is what I guess Peter Boghossian and maybe others have called like idea smuggling. Sort of, you take this ridiculous stuff, but you put it through a accreditation body, which you actually happen to have created yourself, sort of, and so off you go, and criminal dollars come out squeaky clean and ready for use.
Peter's talked about this. He calls it idea laundering. And we've all seen it happen. If you have any familiarity with academe, with how these journals exist. So, for instance, Fat Studies is a great example, because Fat Studies, actually, most of the things came from America, and actually Fat Studies came from Britain. It was British academics who did this, which is odd because there's more of an obesity problem over here. But nevertheless, they wanted to promote the idea that being obese, being morbidly obese, that there was no connection between that and poor health, right? I mean, for God's sake, there's a connection between that and not being able to walk up the stairs. So we can all see that there's a problem.
The diabetes and heart disease trends are a mere coincidence. It's because of sunspots and climate change.
Well, they say that because the medical profession is so sort of imbued systemically with anti-fat prejudice, that's why this lie that diabetes and cancer is connected to obesity is promoted.
I think they are right in that medicine is against you being overweight.
Yeah, it is.
Because of health, because that's definitionally what it's trying to do. So I guess there's a certain logic underneath the surface.
Yeah, exactly. Titania used to talk about how fat shaming was evil, and there would be no bullying amongst kids if you just overfed your children, made them all fat, and that would be one way to combat it. This is something that, I mean, but this point about idea laundering, I think it's important because we all know that that's nonsense. But what you can do is you set up a journal called Fat Studies, you get some PhDs to write articles, and they all cite each other. So it gives this illusion of incontrovertibility, that this expert said it, this expert said it, but they're just citing each other. Now, I noticed this a long time ago. When I was at university, I saw academics within the humanities, within English literature, doing precisely the same thing. One of the most fashionable things was to be a post-Foucauldian, to apply Foucault to literature and to sort of treat him as a kind of deity. I mean, they did. I went to conferences where there was a man called David Halperin who wrote a book called Saint Foucault Towards a Gay Hagiography. I mean, they're explicitly deifying this man, or at least canonizing in that case. But what I noticed is that all these academics, the same names would crop up again and again. David Halperin, Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, whoever it might be, quoting each other, building up this straw man, this sort of wicker man of nonsense, and pretending that it was real. They all had this thing about how homosexuality didn't exist before the word was invented, and that's straight from Foucault's History of Sexuality. The idea.
When does that even?
Well, because for the postmodern mindset, our understanding of language is our understanding of reality is entirely mediated through language and constructed by language. I mean, Foucault didn't say that language creates reality, but he said that our understanding of it was constructed that way, which is why, of course, today the woke activists want to control language. They think if they control the way you speak, they can control reality, reshape reality. 2 + 2 = 5, for instance. They say words are violence. They say,
and silence is violence.
So you can't win. So these academics were doing a similar thing. They were creating this question of, well, let's take that, the word homosexual, which is a Latin Greek compound which came into popularity in the medical discourses of the late 19th century, and before then you didn't really have a designation for people who were exclusively same-sex attracted, and this sort of had the effect of pathologizing it and saying this is a thing. But of course there were people who were exclusively attracted to their own sex in existence before that, centuries before that. Well, they've always been there. In fact, there's a poet who I studied called Richard Barnfield, a contemporary of Shakespeare, who was obviously gay, just wrote love sonnets to another man. It's very clear. Shakespeare wrote love sonnets to a man as well. He was probably bisexual, if we take the sonnets as evidence of that. Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day is his most famous poem, but that's written from one man to another. That's a gay poem. So the idea that these individuals weren't same-sex attracted because they didn't have a word to describe it is like saying that alcoholism didn't exist until the word existed. It's like saying electricity didn't exist until we had a word for it. It doesn't make any sense. So
if you don't know the word table, this isn't even really here.
It's not here.
Just I don't know what it is. My hand can go right through it.
Exactly. So it's a nonsense. And one of the great minds who was challenging this back then in the 90s was Camille Paglia,
yes,
who wrote a very good essay on this called Junk Bonds and Corporate Raiders, which I think was meant to be a review of one of David Halperin's books, but it ended up effectively being a takedown of academia. It was basically saying, look at all these people quoting each other for their shoddy books. They know nothing. They don't read. They don't read the text they ought to read. They just theorize and read about Foucault. Some of them don't even read Foucault. They just read about him. So there was always a fraudulence built into the humanities, particularly when it comes to English literature. And I think that, because that's my background, I'm quite alert to that fraudulence, and I know it when I see it. And I've seen a lot of it from the woke activists.
I'm gonna zigzag a little bit, but it's towards an end.
Okay.
You were raised Catholic, is that right?
Yeah.
Do you still consider yourself a Catholic?
Yeah, it's built in. I mean, I'm from a Northern Irish family. I went to a convent school. Those things do not leave you.
You're gay.
Yes.
You've written an article condemning Pride Month. I've got a couple quotes from it.
Okay.
That
Are these going to be gotchas?
no, they're not gotchas.
The evil things you've said.
Yes, no. My intention, in part, in this conversation is to air some of my own things that should get me canceled.
Okay.
But the article's powerful and educational, and everyone should read it, because as someone who's not gay and hasn't spent a lot of time on the history of the gay rights movement, I learned a bunch of stuff.
Right. Okay.
But I'm going to read an extended piece just for a bit, because I think it's really interesting. Pride has transformed from an important act of resistance into a month-long orgy of corporatism and virtue signaling, full of heterosexuals desperate to identify themselves into an oppressed group with the help of trans ideology. Progress pride flags flutter from every high street store. This relatively new design, a kaleidoscopic eyesore, true, that has replaced the traditional six-stripe pride flag, is emblazoned on schools, universities, hospitals, civic buildings. And I'll interject that last June I was in New York City and saw that ridiculous flag hanging above the corporate offices of J.P. Morgan Chase.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, the oppression. Oh, Occupy Wall Street, you sure have. In the city of Arlington in Texas, This year's family-friendly Pride event included displays of dildos, half-naked drag queens, and human dogs in bondage gear, all co-sponsored by Lockheed Martin, the world's largest producer of armaments. First of all, is that true? It was actually sponsored by Lockheed Martin?
Yes. So, they bomb people, but they do so in an inclusive way, I guess.
Well, bombs don't discriminate.
No, quite. Okay. Yeah, the absurdities, seems self-satirizing, doesn't it? But also the fact that it is a family event full of fetishists who are, it's obviously not appropriate for that kind of stuff to go on in front of kids. And the problem we've seen in America, the support for gay marriage has been plummeting.
Yes.
And part of the reason for that is people see this stuff and they think this is what gay people are. Most gay people are against this stuff quite overwhelmingly. Now, the reason I wrote that article is because that Progress Pride flag is it flutters absolutely everywhere. It symbolizes an anti-gay movement. It symbolizes a movement that believes that biological sex is unimportant and ought to be eroded, those categories. Now, if you do that, you erode the foundations of gay rights. Gay rights is built on the premise that there are a minority of people who are attracted to members of their own sex. If you take away the idea of same-sex attraction, then you get rid of gay rights. And this is precisely what Stonewall have done. They actually redefined on their website, on their promotional materials, they redefined the phrase homosexual. They say it now means someone who is attracted to someone of their own gender. But what does that mean? It means anyone who identifies as men. Now you can see there are all these lesbian dating apps where there are men with beards on the apps claiming to be lesbians, fully intact with male genitalia. And then they're crying transphobe and bigot because lesbians don't want to sleep with them. Yeah, sexuality discriminates. It's a form of discrimination. Lesbians don't want to sleep with men, not because they're bigots, but because they're lesbians. It shouldn't be that difficult to understand.
Okay, so this is where I'm gonna, because you're a filthy comic with a sharp wit, I'm going to expose my history of prejudice to you to examine it.
Yeah.
And I've been wanting to find the right person to do this with. And since we just met yesterday, this is the perfect time.
Great.
I'm Catholic. I was raised in an Italian Catholic household. My whole family goes back to Italy,
Yes.
South Philadelphia, basically Italian ghetto. I grew up in a family in which, including to recent relatives, gay is psychological disorder. This is a bunch of weirdo stuff.
Yeah.
And this is all just sin and terrible.
Yeah.
That is how I was raised. And so I adopted that as a belief until I got out of college, started working in New York City, met and worked with and befriended and came to love and respect gay people. And I honestly grew up with a certain amount of just genuine disgust.
Yeah.
As a heterosexual man, this makes me uncomfortable. If I find out, if I went to college and somebody reveals they're gay and it's like, are they coming on to me? All that stuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff is there.
Yeah.
And I've gone through this journey of coming to love and appreciate and understand that my cousin who's gay didn't choose to be gay. He's gay. He deserves to have a happy life. And now I'm starting to feel myself pulled into a wary posture.
Yeah.
Because of the insanity you're talking about.
Yes.
And starting to say, was gay marriage a mistake?
Yeah.
Was this the dam breaking and all the concerns of slippery slope? It was like, here in the States, there's a conservative Christian Republican politician, Rick Santorum, who really was out there at the time being like, we do this, and next thing you know, there's going to be people saying I should be able to marry my dog.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely excoriated as a knuckle-dragging, Neanderthal, bigoted, fascist, demon, evil, horrible person.
Yeah.
In your article, there are pictures of people in dog costumes walking down the street for Pride Month.
Yeah.
Help me out.
Where to begin?
No, I mean, is it a mistake? Did we?
Okay. I think
You're Catholic too. Catholic Church doesn't recognize gay marriage. I'm not saying convince me gay marriage is good. Help me out with, as someone who sees himself as a liberal, open-minded person that wants to love you as a fellow man, and wants you to be happy. And if I had a gay child, I would want them to have a happy life.
Yeah, there's so much there.
But I'm
there.
disequilibrated by everything that's happening.
Well, sure. Well, firstly, the sense you have of uncertainty and that this is something that is not normal and all that kind of thing those are completely natural. I mean, I think the reason why hostility towards gay people will always exist is because it is the minority sexuality, and actually, pretty much everyone is, at least, if not disgusted, then put off by sexual activities which they do not find appealing. So gay people will find heterosexual sex to be disgusting. Some people, or they'll find it at least a bit icky. Those feelings are perfectly normal because it's about sexuality, as I say, is a discriminator. It's something that people, have in them for whatever reason. Catholic Church, of course, are right to say marriage is heterosexual because this is an ancient religious tradition. That should, I think, be separated from civil marriage, from the idea if the state is going to allow its citizens to marry and have a contract, which is effectively a social contract between two people, then it's a no-brainer to me that should be offered to absolutely everyone. But that's not the same. That's not to say that religious bodies ought to be forced into doing the same thing. I think those two things are different.
Yeah, I was for, even at the time, I was always for what here was referred to as civil unions. Even George W. Bush, he was saying we should be
right
the legal equivalent of marriage, but not technically call it marriage. It was be civil.
But it doesn't bother me if they call it marriage. I mean, if it is a civil thing, then it's got nothing to do with the church anyway. They can carry on doing their heterosexual marriages and make it exclusively so. That's their right. So I don't think that's a problem. The Catechism, as you know, doesn't say that being gay is a sin. It says that sexual acts are sinful, but of course it says that about all sexual acts out of wedlock, so that would apply to heterosexuals as well.
Right.
So leaving all of that aside, one of the things that's really important, I think, to understand here is it's effectively the slippery slope argument.
Yeah.
So we opened up we allowed gay marriage to happen, and this somehow led to a degradation to the extent that you now have people dressed as dogs, all the rest of it. Now, I think the problem with that is it misunderstands what's happening within this thing. We've created this thing called the LGBTQIA plus community. Only the first three letters of that have anything to do with gay people. The rest are predominantly straight people with a kink. So the majority of people who now identify as LGBTQ are heterosexuals. Now, so this is now a heterosexual movement.
These are the non-binaries and the bisexuals who've only ever had relationships with people of the opposite sex.
Quite. Or people who are identifying as trans or being transed out of a sense of disgust at their own homosexuality, which is very, very common. And they saw that was revealed at the Tavistock Pediatric Clinic. So many of those kids were same-sex attracted. Between 80 and 90% were same-sex attracted. There was a dark joke at the Tavistock where the staff were saying, well, soon there won't be any gay people left, because we're changing them all. The transing of children.
So basically, so Tavistock was adopting explicitly internally the policy of Iran towards homosexuality.
Identical to Iran. I mean, in Iran, the state will fund you to change sex because they will hang gay people from cranes. And so they want to fix you, to heterosexualize you, to correct you. The Pakistani government did that for a while. They stopped that a couple of years ago, but they were funding sex changes. Although at the time, Pink News, a sort of LGBT outlet in the UK, did a video saying, oh, Pakistan has just waved the flag for trans rights. Isn't this progressive? No, it's because they were killing gay people and they wanted to straighten you out. So anyway.
This is so... How did this happen?
Yeah. So I think,
how could you do that?
So we have got now, with the Tavistock, with paediatric gender clinics, this is the NHS, the National Health Service. It has now something in common with the mullahs of Tehran. That's disturbing. But we know, and this is very important for people to understand, that the same young people who are same-sex attracted are disproportionately, overwhelmingly represented among kids who present as trans. Right? It's boys who are effeminate. It's girls who are tomboys. It's kids who are gender non-conforming. And we know that gender non-conformity in youth, every study says this, is a very reliable predictor of homosexuality in later life. It doesn't mean that a camp, effeminate boy will turn out to be gay. That's not what I'm saying. 9 times out of 10 they will, right? So and that's what the studies tell us. So you're taking these kids along who don't fit into this old-fashioned heterosexual men should behave like this, women should behave like this paradigm, and fixing them and correcting them according to 1950s sex stereotypes. And they're doing that in the name of progress. Like I said, between 80 and 90%, that's confirmed. You can read Hannah Barnes's book on this. It's called Time to Think. We know that the whistleblowers from the Tavistock, from all of these gender clinics, they say again and again, one of the biggest explanatory aspects of this is parents who don't want to have a gay kid. They're much happier having a kid who's heterosexual and trans because they're uncomfortable. They don't like the idea. They're ashamed of it. So autism, by the way, is also hugely overrepresented amongst kids who are referred to as trans. Hugely disproportionately. So there's all these other comorbidities, other issues going on with these kids. And yet the UK government wants to criminalise the therapeutic approach to these. They, you know, when a practitioner sits down with a kid and says, okay, let's talk about the other issues that might be going on in your life, they want to ban that and call it conversion therapy. So
doing actual surgery to change your biology in the name of a manifestly false belief,
yes,
isn't conversion therapy.
Well, of course,
but trying to do traditional therapy where you don't push people to accept their belief in fiction. It's conversion.
It's predicated on the idea that there is such a thing as gender identity, which I don't believe there is. And the government should not be endorsing pseudo-religious ideas and forming NHS policy on that basis. And of course, by saying that they want to ban trans conversion therapy, they're effectively bringing in gay conversion therapy. What these gender clinics for kids are is gay conversion therapy 2.0. Back in the 60s, they used to wire gay men up to electrodes and try and torture it out of them. Now they just mutilate children into heterosexual paradigms to get rid. It's the same thing. And I think there's something about this antagonism, this antipathy towards homosexuality, which you described as a sense of disgust, which will always manifest in one way or another. It just so happens that at the moment, it's the gender abattoirs that are doing this. Back in the 60s, it would have been the doctors wiring people up, like that guy Galbraith in America, who claimed to have cured a homosexual man.
Or Alan Turing, who was chemically castrated, as I understand it.
With the same drug that they use to block puberty in kids. Yeah. Or the corrective rape of lesbians, which still goes on in some countries in the developing world. So, okay. So the key thing I suppose I want to get to is that because the gender identity ideology movement, which is cheered on by all sorts of useful idiots, is an essentially anti-gay movement. Partly because it wants to shame gay people for being gay. You know, they say that phrase, genital preferences are transphobic. That's their phrase. Or they will call you a bigot. You know, the head of Stonewall, Nancy Kelly, she was CEO of Stonewall. She said that women who are lesbians who want to exclude people with penises from their dating pool were analogous to sexual racists. She said you might want to examine your prejudice. And this is coming from the head of the leading gay rights organization. Grindr, a hookup app for gay men, won't allow you to filter out women who identify as men because that makes you a bigot. So you have to include. But if you're gay, why would you want to sleep with a woman? It doesn't make any sense. So when you have a gay hookup site shaming gay men for being gay, you know there's a problem here. Now, I would say also, remember, there's a statistic I quote in that article, a survey of, weirdly, I think it's young Christians between the ages of, I think it's between 18 and 30, and it's something like 40% of Americans in that category now identify as LGBTQ.
Yes.
Now, that would, because of statistics, we know. The statistics on the prevalence of homosexuality means that the people who are identifying into that category are largely straight. Within that LGBTQ bracket, now we know it's mostly straight people. Now, this was not meant to be a movement about straight fetishists or defending straight fetishists or people identifying into an oppressed class so they can enjoy the status of victimhood. People like asexuals. I mean, the last London Pride the march was led by an asexual activist.
What is an asexual?
One who doesn't want to have sex.
How's that interesting?
It's not interesting.
How's that interesting?
Right, it's not interesting, it's not important.
I guess it's like a eunuch, but without taking the knife to your stuff.
Well,
or something.
I guess, but no one's ever been burnt at the stake for not wanting to have sex. They don't share a history of oppression that is akin to the oppression of gay individuals or gay men in particular. So that's just someone who wants attention and wants to be a victim, because perversely, within this woke era, being a victim gives you power. And I think that's what's going on there. But whatever else you might call this, those pride marches with the Progress Pride flag, with the dogs, leather dog fetish, whatever the hell that is, that's not gay people. There will be gay people who are participating. Most of the people participating will be straight. So if we're going to pin the responsibility on anyone, it should be the heterosexuals.
That's fair. That's fair.
And so therefore to say that...
The psychopaths.
Right. To say that gay marriage led to this is actually incoherent. The gay marriage movement was a very conservative movement. It came in the UK from the Conservative Party. It's the idea that gay people should be normalized in society. It's actually why a lot of gay activists opposed gay marriage, because they said, look, we're outside of this heteronormative bubble, you know? They didn't want that. They didn't want to be the same. But of course, a conservative gay person does want to be the same, wants to be treated exactly the same. So it doesn't surprise me that it's largely right-leaning parties that were promoting gay marriage. That actually is the opposite of what the fetishists are doing with Pride. That's the opposite of twerking in front of a child for money. That's because
that's having a committed relationship.
It's exactly right. So to say that the one led to the other is actually to get it completely 100% backwards. I think the reason why there's a problem within Pride now is because it no longer represents gay people. It represents the LGBTQIA plus society, whatever that is, or LGBTQIA2S. You can add as many numbers and letters
the whole
as you
alphabet.
want.
It'll be the whole alphabet and all of numerology.
Which is antagonistic to gay rights. In Cardiff at a Pride march, lesbians were escorted away by police because they were holding a sign saying lesbians don't like penises. So if you have a situation where gay people are being kicked out of Pride by the police, how can we say this has got anything to do with homosexuality anymore? It's nothing to do with gay rights at all.
I think the discomfort that has emerged out of this is perhaps that you're a heterodox voice, and that what has happened, I don't know how to think about this really in a robust way. There's something that is emergent called culture and norms, right?
Yeah.
I think that's true. They're a weird thing. They're not like even a thing. They're a meta thing. And there seems to be a tendency towards shift.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the sense in which I have become, and I'm obviously not alone, because as you said, even Gen Z is now becoming reactionary against gay marriage.
Yeah.
Now, I've had half the places I've lived now I've had neighbors who've been gay couples for basically my entire post-college life.
Yeah.
It's never caused me extreme levels of discomfort or anything. My son grew up with neighbors who were gay couples. I never worried he's going to be made into a gay.
No, it doesn't work that way.
Exposed to Carl next door.
Yeah.
That was never a thing I was worried about. Even if my ignorance as a child maybe thought that would. But I grew up. But there is this more cultural thing about, well, now we've degraded this thing that was sacred of marriage.
Yeah.
And shifted it, expanded it to include this naturally procreative relationship. And so why can't it now keep expanding? And isn't that expansionism has something to do with where we are in this confusion of our times now?
I think you have to question the causality there. How do you get from gay marriage or expanding marriage, at least on a civil basis, to anyone who wants to have any adult who wants to commit to another adult? How do you get from that to the toleration of abusive and fetishistic practices around children? Because the one actually is completely distinct from the other. I don't see on Pride parades a celebration of gay marriage. I don't see any of that.
No, that's true.
It's got nothing to do with it. In fact, it's obverse, isn't it? It's about the idea of a sexual free-for-all akin to the 1960s free love movement. It's more, I understand
it's
that
bondage, and it's
Right.
it's weird stuff. It's stuff that you don't want your kids to see. And hey, behind closed doors, do what you want, and you're an adult.
But because I don't think Pride is a gay event anymore, because I think it is largely a heterosexual event anymore, what this really should be about is societal attitudes towards permissive sexuality, towards that free love mentality. I mean, why, if we're going to blame this on gay marriage, why couldn't we just as easily blame it on the popularity of 50 Shades of Grey, a heterosexual bondage book? Why,
Fair.
given that
That's
neither
fair.
of these things are represented in the Pride March? Actually, no, the bondage is. So I would just question the causality there.
No, you're helping me. I'm asking this, having not thought this through, and you're actually helping me think about this more. In a more thoughtful way, because it's like I was like, why not have this conversation with Andrew in a context that I'll share with the world for my ignorance to be put on display?
I mean, I suppose part of the problem is that because homosexuality was criminal up until living memory, it's always been more sexually open in terms of, well, promiscuous, let's put it that way. You didn't have the bond of marriage, and so, and you're dealing particularly with gay men. Male sexuality, which is a very powerful force, if left untethered, promiscuity is inevitable. And so, all of the novels and the films about homosexual lifestyle was things like Cruising, the William Friedkin film. You see these sex clubs, you see all of this kind of thing. And what this current Pride movement has taken that element of gay culture, which did exist and does exist, I'm not denying that, and sort of suggested that this is the norm for gay people. But the people who were fighting for gay marriage wanted to reverse that. Remember when Cruising came out, it was gay protesters saying they wanted to shut that film down because they thought it would promote the idea that gay people are inherently deviant. That's what sort of happened. There's a good article which you might want to read about this by Boswell, a man called Boswell. What's his name? I think it's James Boswell, who was a historian, a gay historian, gay Catholic historian. He's an essay called Rediscovering Gay History, and he talks about how when straight people saw all these depictions in literature and art of gay men having sex with multiple partners in the same day and all this kind of thing, they couldn't see whether that was meant to be the gay ideal, or was it the failure of an ideal, or was it both? Whereas when it came to the heterosexual world, straight men, of course, a lot of them cheat on their wives, but they know they've failed the ideal when they do that. It's acknowledged that that's a failure. Whereas in the gay world, you can't see that. Precisely because we didn't have those normative practices like marriage built in to create a foundation stone. So I think, so the problem...
Well, this was how I understood and supported. And I suppose perhaps still support, but I am more questioning. And that's what this conversation now is about for the moment, which is... I was in favor of gay marriage when it happened.
Yeah.
Here in the States, it was through a Supreme Court decision, which was a little weird.
But what were you in favor of? Are you in favor of the idea of a contract between two individuals who want to commit to each other exclusively?
Yes.
Right.
And more than that, though, was the sense in which, as a libertarian-minded, liberal-minded person, that when you have prohibitionist, I am not a prohibitionist. I believe prohibitionism is legal prohibitionism.
Yes.
Only ever really gives rise to a more toxic behavior in the black market.
Right. Okay. Yes.
So you prohibit drugs, and what you get is fentanyl-laced marijuana that kills your kids.
And you get Al Capone.
And you get Al Capone, and you get narcos. That's what you get. You get the worst actors now congregating amongst themselves in a spiral to hell. That's what you get with prohibitionism. So in that...
Okay, and is that not what we had with homosexuality, given that it was demonized and considered to be deviant and evil?
Yes.
Of course, you got a highly sexualized culture.
Yeah, I think that I accept that I think that makes all the world of sense to me.
And also, of course, as I say, it's very important that you remember you're dealing with male sexuality. Of course.
Yeah, men are.
Yeah, dogs. I mean, the thing is, you can say that a lot of conservative Christians say, look at how promiscuous gay men are statistically, and they are more promiscuous, and that proves that being gay is deviant. But lesbians are far less promiscuous than heterosexuals. So by their own logic, they think lesbianism is the ideal. But I don't think they actually think that, do they? So, it's to do with men and women. That's really the difference. But so I would be interested to know how in your mind you get from that, from to your support for gay marriage, the idea of creating or normalizing, shall we say, homosexual respectability and commitment and family. Why you see that as being a gateway to the fetishists and the exhibitionists?
Well, I don't want to overstate it. I'm not saying I do. I'm saying that
But you're sensing that.
It has like reawakened a concern and a worry that, and maybe part of it might be that it doesn't seem like there's enough of a forceful pushback in our culture against the whacked out weird stuff going on. We need more Andrew Doyles out there in the world saying this, and maybe there are, and I'm deaf to it. So I guess help me.
That's interesting. So, and I would, because I've never heard it articulated. I've heard a lot of people say we should never have allowed gay marriage because look where it's led. I've never heard actually how you've got from one to the other articulated as an argument. And I don't think if people think about it, they'll be able to do it. And that's what makes me mistrusted. So I think all this is a kind of, well, actually, partly it's the fault of this transmogrification of LGB into LGBTQIA+. I think it's confused everyone.
It absolutely has. It's been deep. I mean, so to take a step back for a second, on a personal level, my son, in some ways, this show that we do exists because I was witnessing problems with my son's generation.
Okay.
So in 6th grade, the start of middle school, he was in a very progressive school that Catherine and the strictest headmaster in the UK.
Catherine Burbelsing.
Yeah. I saw her at ARC. I told her about my journey of my son, and she was like, "You have just done a terrible thing to your son. You've made horrible choices."
She's very plain speaking.
Like on Twitter, she later was like, because I had seen her speech and I was like, oh, this lady's amazing. I can't wait to talk to her. Then I talked to her and she dresses me down about my progressive school choices. And then later comes back and says, oh, you were so nice to me and I treated you so bad. I was like, that's fine. I don't care. That's great. He went to a school in which he started getting all this gender nonconformity, non-binary fluidity stuff.
Yes.
He was asked as part of a baby sociology class to play act as if he was a cross-dresser at coming to the prom. I mean, it was as a parent, like a full frontal assault on my son.
Right. Okay.
And I wasn't laying that at the feet of gay people everywhere. It was like, I don't know what this is, but this is part of an idea of inclusive, progressive something that has triggered me to be your enemy now.
So and
I need to navigate this in a way that's loving and honest because I'm a thoughtful person and I want to be in pursuit of truth, not emotional reactions.
But the ideology that you have just described that is being promoted by various activist teachers is an anti-gay ideology. All of that stuff you've just described is coming from people who want to erode the very concept of homosexuality. They want to erode the very concept of sex difference. So to blame it on the gays is to blame it on the very people they want to eliminate. It's the wrong target.
No, I think that is a really, it's obviously true.
Yeah.
Because the entire argument, even from my own family members, even in my family, about family members who we knew to be gay from an early age, everybody knew. It's like, well, we know he's gay. Like he's been gay since he was little. Like it was obvious from an early age.
Yeah. It often is. Yeah.
The argument for and part of this conversation, I want to. Part of my goal here of sort of like inviting you to beat me up on this is for the parent who watches, who maybe has a child. This is my biggest worry. As a parent now, you are in hell in this.
Oh yeah, I would not want to be a parent at this time.
I'm lucky. My son's got no problems. He knows what he is. He's got a girlfriend. He's great. He's no problem. But but I've talked to some of his friends. One example was a friend of his, more of an acquaintance, but he was talking about this gender fluid stuff.
Yeah,
he
yeah.
thought, and then he felt bad because there was a time where he thought he was bi or thought he was gay, and he was using the word fag, and so then he felt bad because, wait, maybe I'm not gay. Oh no, I used fag. I shouldn't say that. And I asked him, I said, when you come out as whatever, non-binary to your friends in school, I imagine there's a lot of pressure to not reverse course once you've done that.
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
And he said, oh yeah, it's like you kind of have to ride that horse, because what are you, changing your mind? Like,
Yeah, that's a really important point, because that's one of the points raised by Hilary Cass in the Cass Review, which is what we call social transitioning. When a school adopts the preferred name and pronouns for a child, that has the effect of locking in psychologically that identity, which vastly increases the chances that this person will go on to irreversible surgery and medication, which means that so many teachers I know have been told by their headmasters and headmistresses, yeah, we call them by the names they want, use the pronouns. Actually, that is a psychological intervention, and it's dangerous. And that's now been confirmed by the Cass Review. So we shouldn't be doing it. Schools should not be doing that at all. That's absolutely clear. But it's particularly, as I say, disproportionately affecting gay people who are going to grow up to be gay. It's fixing and correcting Iran-style gay kids. So therefore, and that I think people, and if you want some encouragement on this, when I posted that article, when I posted the video version of the article, there are hundreds of comments, quote tweets, and it's all from gay people saying this is how I think. There are so many gay people. I don't know any gay people who support gender identity ideology as a concept, because they recognize that it is antagonistic to their interests. So given that, and I know there are prominent gay celebrities who are waving the flag for this nonsense, who, by the way, do not understand what it is they're waving the flag for. They see it as a continuation, in the same way that people make the mistake of thinking that critical race theory is a continuation from Martin Luther King's civil rights work, when it's a direct antithesis to it.
it's a very explicit, like in black and white refutation of it.
Exactly, but the reason why it's gained such a foothold is because people assume it's the same thing, and similarly, people are assuming that Pride in its current manifestation and the Progress Pride flag is a continuation of the Civil Rights March, Stonewall 1969, the Gay Liberation Front, it's not. It's antithetical. Think of it in that terms, in that analogy with critical race theory. Maybe that'll make people understand that they're being gulled into thinking it's one and the same thing, and it's so the opposite. This is a movement that wants to eradicate homosexuality, that wants to medicalize gay kids so that they fit into a straight paradigm. How is that anything other than anti-gay? I mean, if that's not homophobic, I don't like using the word homophobic because I think it pathologizes a different opinion. But if that's not homophobic, to actually surgically correct people if they're gay, then what is?
I don't think I've heard anyone else quite articulate it in that way to me, and it's really powerful. Is it not? So what is I don't like these terms, community in general.
No.
I imagine you don't either.
No, of course not. It doesn't exist.
Because what are you talking about? Do you go to a meeting and you know all the people? Like,
Yeah.
Communities outside.
You get a gay card or something, yeah.
It's like, oh, the black community. It's like, which black community?
Right. Well, it's a way to sort of homogenize everyone, sort of suggest that all black people think this way and all gay people think this way. And it's, obviously it's a nonsense.
So what are gay people to do about the hijacking and the absorption, like a blob of psychosis and psychopathy that has taken place, so that someone like me, you've helped me in this conversation clarify thinking that, and I'm going to live with this for a while, because it's not been something where I'm suddenly like anti-gay. That's not what's happened, but it has just become the playing field has gotten really weird.
Yeah.
I need to understand this, or I want to understand it to communicate with my son about what's happening.
Yeah.
And what who to trust about these things, in a world where he has friends who've struggled with gender identity or whatever. It's like, what is that?
Well, we have to have an open conversation about that for a start. What do people mean by gender identity? I've never had a satisfactory answer to that question. I've asked a trans campaigner on my show in England, what do you mean by gender identity? And this individual said it's an essence of male or female. They're talking about souls. It's a pseudo-religious idea. All sorts of trans activists have said there's something like a subconscious soul, subconscious sex. No, that's not real. That's not a thing. And we used to sort of say, you know, when we were at this sort of liberal peak, I'd say, you know, if you had a son who liked wearing dresses or just naturally had an effeminate way about him, just let him get on with it. It's nothing to do with it. The difference now is, like, as you say, you've got teacher activists dressing kids up and trying to force it on them. So we always had the problem, you know, I would say that growing up gay today is far more dangerous than growing up gay when I was a kid. When I was a kid, gay was a slur.
Yeah.
There were no out gay teenagers at the school, because to do so, you'd be beaten up for it. You would become a pariah for it. It wasn't possible. But at least the teachers and the headmaster and the people in authority weren't trying to castrate me. That's the difference. So it's far more dangerous now for gay kids. We need to do something, therefore, to just let kids grow up in the way they need to grow up and be whoever they are. But when you say that there's such a thing as an innate gender identity and that's your authentic self, even though you're basing this on something that doesn't exist, and that's being adopted by governments and medical bodies and the NHS and WPATH and all the rest of it, that's what we have to fight and unpick. You have to sit these people down and say, what do you mean by gender identity, and why should we be legislating and applying policy on the basis of that belief system? And if they can't explain it, which they can't, we need to ditch it. No more social transitioning in schools. Let's just talk about non-binary as what it is, a fad equivalent to being a goth or an emo. But you don't introduce law to protect goths and the rights of goths to wear black eyeliner. And nor should you for someone who says they're non-binary. The designation of non-binary is a very, very conservative view of gender, because what you're saying is there's a way that men should behave traditionally, there's a way that women traditionally behave, and I don't fit in either of those paradigms. So actually, by declaring yourself non-binary, you're declaring yourself a very conservative person with very conservative views of what it means to be male and female. I think largely this is to do with explaining to people what's going on here. It's very, very hard. This is why I wrote a book about it, called The New Puritans. I tried to explain where this was coming from, to guide people through the linguistic minefield that's going on, because that's how people are being gulled. And particularly when it comes to this point, activists think that, well, they're behaving like they can recruit, aren't they? They're behaving as though they can, and this was always the great fear about gay people back in the day, that they would recruit. You know, there were all those public information films, beware of the homosexual, he might recruit. And of course you can't, it's not a possible thing, because someone's sexuality, whether it is to do with chemicals in the womb, whether it is to do with socialization, we don't know. But what we do know is that conversion therapy doesn't work. You can't change someone's sexual orientation. So I suppose I want to go back to this idea of communicating what the issues actually are, and not relying on half-witted gay celebrities who don't understand what it is they are promoting and saying that's representative of the gay community. I think there's a problem, because gay celebrities overwhelmingly support the Progress Pride flag and all that it entails.
Yes.
Because to take the view that I'm espousing probably means you're not going to get that next job in Hollywood, right?
Well, this is the part of to take seriously your critique is to say that the TQ, all the rest stuff going on is the greatest threat to gay rights of our time.
Which it is.
So but the people who, so is that an accident? Or is that a plot? Because there's a weirdness there, in that I think the case for that's very persuasive. Like, it clearly is true.
Yeah.
Like, it's clearly true. I mean, I was talking to Heather Hang about, and she's said this many times, that she's a tomboy that likes science.
Yeah.
So if she was born today, there'd be legions of people saying, "You're a boy, you're a boy, you're a boy, you're a boy."
Exactly.
Which is, it's just like, that's barbaric, and it's crazy, it's insane.
Yeah, I mean, I met a guy in his 20s he doesn't have testicles anymore because they castrated him, but he's just a camp guy. I met this guy in New York. He's just a camp gay guy, obviously gay guy. So that, I mean, that is obviously true, isn't it?
But I guess the point is that I would guess that the overwhelming majority of the people flying this flag, who think of themselves as trans or whatever, they see themselves as allies to gay. I mean, I know there are these people who are like, no, you're like a cis. I'm not sure what the designation is, but you're like really low on the. Yeah. You're a white gay male, so you're not even that high on the intersectional hierarchy.
You can't underestimate the levels of anti-gay hatred within the trans community. It's off the scale.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, just search cis faggot and you'll see all this stuff come up. There used to be a website that collected it all called Woke Homophobia, and it had thousands and thousands of screenshots of trans activists saying gay people should all be killed. Let's recriminalize homosexuality. AIDS was fantastic. These fags need to. I would spit on their graves. I
don't know anything about this.
No, this was on the Google website. Google took it down. I have the files of all that. I might repost it all again because I just need people to be able to see. When trans activists talk amongst themselves, they hate gay people with a passion. A lot of them. Now, of course, not all. I must clarify that. Of course, not all. But a substantial. It's not an aberration. It's very much normalized within the community in the way that punching a turf is normalized within the community. I'm not saying every trans activist wants to hit women, but there is a toleration for that behavior within that movement. There was a trans pride rally in London where an activist stood up and said, if you see a turf, punch them in the fucking face. And they got a loud cheer. The activist calling for violence against women in of itself doesn't bother. Well, of course it bothers me because you shouldn't be calling for violence, but I could dismiss that as just, a rogue idiot, but the whole crowd cheered. Now, if I was in a protest and someone's called for violence and everyone cheered around me, I'd be saying, why do you all cheer? Why are you doing this? Shut him down. Don't let him represent us. In the trans community, violence and violent rhetoric and posting images of guns and baseball bats at women who challenge you is normal. Is completely normal and unremarkable. So too is the casual attacks on gay people for being faggots and fags and evil, dirty scum and all the rest of it. That's very, very normalized. So that can't be underestimated. So whether it's deliberate or not, we have to understand that LGB and TQ plus cannot be combined because they are essentially antagonistic. They cannot be put together in the way that people try to do. It's equivalent for the Queers for Palestine. You can't put together Hamas and homosexuality. It doesn't fit.
So is there something else then going on? Because the Queers for Palestine connects the dots to the mega movement.
The omnicause.
Is it all just communism? Is it all just neo-communistic weirdo transgress at every norm and what do you sound too normal, therefore I hate? Like, what's connecting the dots here? Is it psychopathy?
It can't be communism. Communism is largely about economics, about the ownership of private property, about this. I suppose you could say that.
Well, class struggle, the victimhood, class the transposition of this victimhood ideology into this new identity.
It's the cultural turn, isn't it? It's the idea when Marxism went away from money and economics into culture and identity. Yeah, I can see that it borrowed the template, but it's not the same thing. I mean, we all know the woke movement is largely the most vocal cheerleaders are upper middle class, wealthy posh, all of the most wealthy universities are the ones that have the problem the worst, all the pampered posh kids. This is not a movement for the proles. This is not a Marxist, let's fight for the working class. In fact, the working class are demonized often as being racist and bigoted, as happened after the Brexit vote in 2016. Most woke activists seem to hate working class people and find them to be a sort of this racist blob on the verge of a pogrom.
Yeah, deplorables.
Deplorables is another
basket of deplorables.
The basket of deplorables, same thing. Yeah. So I know a lot of people talk about this in terms of I see it as a Marxian movement rather than a Marxist movement, in that it borrows some of the DNA from it, but it also borrows from, and from the French postmodernists, most notably, I would say, and also the Frankfurt School. But it's not as easy as saying this is communism. I don't think it's as simple as that, and I don't think that's actually a helpful way of thinking. You won't solve it that way, in the same way that you won't solve it by thinking about this in terms of right versus left, and particularly when it comes to the gay issue, we should be thinking of it in terms of getting back to the basics of what does gay rights mean. It means the right to acknowledge and recognize that there are people who are innately attracted to their own sex and they deserve the same rights as everybody else. And that's what it is. But if you are a lesbian in Melbourne, in Australia, it is currently against the law for you to gather with other lesbians and exclude men who identify as women. I interviewed a woman called Jenny Watson on my show. She had a lesbian speed dating event in London, which was cancelled by the event for being bigoted. A man had shown up dressed as a woman, saying that he was a woman, started feeling up some women in the toilets. She wanted this man to leave. Also, it's a speed dating event for lesbians, which means they're there to meet other lesbians. The fact that gets this stick. You've got Sal Grover in Australia. I don't know if you heard about her case. She set up an app for women called Tickle. Called Giggle. I get this confused.
Cause and effect.
Well, no, because the case is called Tickle versus Giggle, because she set up an app for women, and a man called Roxanne Tickle, who identifies as a woman, said he should be able to go on this app for lesbians because he's a lesbian, and he took it all the way to the courts, and it's currently going through the high courts at the moment. It sounds made up, doesn't it? Please Google that, because it's absolutely insane. So, there's a reason why lesbians want to assemble with other lesbians, particularly if they're trying to meet a partner. That shouldn't be controversial. Same way with gay men. They might sometimes want to meet with other gay men. This even goes down to the very things that you've got reservations about, where people meet for sex in sex clubs and that kind of thing. Well, now those clubs are full of women who've had their breasts removed, young women who have been told that if they have their breasts removed and identify as female and cut their hair, gay men will fancy them. They've been told a lie because gay men aren't interested in women. Oh, by the way, there's another thing. Because Grindr is... I'm not on Grindr or any of those apps, but I have gay friends who meet men for sex on Grindr. They say now the app is full of these women who call themselves men. And there are also now straight men who go on Grindr to meet and have sex with these women who think they're men, because it's an easy way to get laid. And it's very, very exploitative.
So it's like, here's someone that has mental health collapse.
Yeah.
And I can take advantage of them because I can't meet a woman the normal way.
You have predatory straight men exploiting this gender idea. We've seen screenshots of these conversations between these men. They're going onto a gay website to have sex with vulnerable women. This is so disordered.
So...
And certainly not pro-gay, I suppose. Really.
Okay, so how does this fever break? Because, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about the corporatization of this, the Disneyification of it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that I grew up, I wanted to be a Disney animator. That was one of my earliest career visions for myself as a child. I loved to draw Disney characters. I worshipped Disney. Disney has become a purveyor of, not necessarily to the extent that right-wingers like to lay at their feet, but they're pushing trans messages on children through their programming.
Oh yeah, there was an episode of Transformers which had a robot asking the pronouns of another robot or correcting a robot's pronouns or something.
So that's
not Disney, I know,
but that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So that's the commanding heights of the world's superpower,
Yeah.
pushing an ideology that, as we've talked about now, wants to erase you from existence and wants to prey on our kids.
Yeah.
What next?
Well,
What do we do?
you have to recognize it for what it is, which is a new religion. And what you don't ever want to do is have a particular religion in charge, because it's a theocracy. You wouldn't, this is why no one wants to live in a fundamentalist Islamic state, because your freedoms are taken away, right? And there are people desperate to get out of those countries for very good reason. But this is a fundamentalist religion. So you don't want them deciding. I mean, one of the great things about secularism is it protects religious freedom. It says, in this country, you can believe whatever you want to believe, so long as you're not encroaching on the rights of other people. That's the ideal. That's the goal. But when you have the government promoting a religion in this way, I mean, if they were enforcing the doctrine of transubstantiation, the belief in transubstantiation on the people, I think you as a Catholic would have a problem with that.
No, I mean, just to push in on that, as an American, I understand that Thomas Jefferson, who I happen to really like, even though he held slaves, he was a big fan of Montesquieu, who was a Catholic philosopher, who said, no, in order to be a good Catholic, you must be exercising your Catholic faith in free will and freedom. Because otherwise, if you're just doing what the state tells you to do, or you'll go to jail, that's not a single one of your choices is moral.
Absolutely.
You can't have enforced morality. You destroy the moral act.
Yes, exactly. So similarly, but they are imposing a set of religious values on a population, not realizing it is a set of religious values. They see it very, very simply as, we don't want to get it wrong again. We got it wrong before with gay rights. We don't want to be on the wrong side of history. That's the phrase that they use all the time. They see the trans rights movement as an extension or replication of the gay rights movement, when it's its direct opposite. So it is about a misunderstanding. I really do believe that. I've never had a conversation. I've spoken to a lot of gay men about this, and lesbians, and they all, when they think about it, when they talk about it, and I hate, this sounds arrogant, but they always come around to my point of view, because when it's subject to scrutiny, when it's thought about, I don't see what other conclusion there is, really. And so it's more, but because those conversations have been curbed by the BBC, by the major broadcasters, by the media, because the conversations aren't happening, people are just going along with what they're told they're meant to think. They're being told, yes, let's wear our pride lanyards, let's support, let's be an ally, not realizing that what they're doing is defending an anti-gay movement. And if they knew what they were doing, I don't think they would go along with it.
You had in the Spiked article referenced some polling of gay people who had turned against Pride.
Yeah,
and it was high numbers, but I don't know whether it was just sort of like a Twitter thing, and it's sort of a self-selecting group.
So we've never had a proper poll on this. It would be very difficult to do, partly because there are high status opinions, and there are particularly high status opinions within gay communities or whatever. A lot of gay people don't get this. They don't understand that they are feeding the beast that will devour them. In addition to that, to express the views that I'm expressing makes you an enemy. People hate you for it. I get a lot of flack for doing so. So actually, finding a way to have a reliable poll on this would be very, very difficult. There have been some Twitter polls. I mean, I quote one, but Twitter polls mean nothing.
No, it could just be a self-selecting group.
Except that there was a poll a couple of years ago by an activist who was having a go at me because of my point of view on this. And he is a gay man, and he posted a poll to his followers, and it got circulated around his followers, and it came out with my view as being the predominant view. And he was so angry about it, he deleted the tweet because he didn't realize. And this went to thousands and thousands of people, so that was quite a high reach. And if you look at the comments from gay people under my article on Twitter, I think the very least we could say is that this is a divisive, unsettled issue. There is not a consensus within the LGBT community that Progress Pride is a positive thing. We know that. We just don't know the numbers of how many. Like I say, I don't know any gay people who support it. None. That might be the circles I move in, but I know gay people from the left and the right, and everyone's got their reservations, and I always get contacted by gay people saying, thanks for saying all this. I can't say it, but I know that this is right, but I'm too scared to stick my neck out. So what we have is well-meaning heterosexuals basically promoting this. You know, Pride is promoted largely by well-meaning heterosexuals, not just the people who are...
yeah, without question.
Yeah, it's not just people participating. It's the corporations. It's all the other things.
Yeah.
The corporations who don't, by the way, care about gay rights, because if they did care about gay rights, they would be promoting this kind of thing in Saudi Arabia.
Well, I have to share this. I screen grabbed it because it was so shocked. Like, it was one of these things where the typical question that would get asked of me for raising some of these things is, why do you care?
Yeah.
Why do you care about all this? What's wrong with you? You got a problem. You got some problems. I was on the Wealthfront app.
I don't know what that is.
It is an application for managing savings and investment. I have my son's college savings in it, and I went to move a little bit of money from one account to another, because he's about to head to college.
Yeah.
And this was what I was greeted with as the celebration. Now, it was last month. We're sitting here in July.
Okay. Yeah. Progress Pride. Everywhere. Like confetti.
Explosion of confetti of the Progress Pride flag.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't opt into this. I didn't ask for this. It's not reasonable.
Yeah.
It would be like, as you said, if I understand this to be a religion, it's me as a Catholic being pushed to religion I find heretical in my face while I try to transfer money from one to another.
Yeah, or a Soviet flag or something.
It's
whatever.
It's
Yeah. Well, that's everywhere though. That's absolutely everywhere.
Wealthfront.
Yeah.
I mean, basically think of it like Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to, there are various apps now or websites where they ask you your pronouns. Well, what they're asking, that's
lab test. Any lab test now does that.
Right, but that's a purity test. That's a test of devotion to the faith. They're basically saying, we believe in this thing called gender identity, and you should as well, and you should at least parrot the shibboleth in order to express your fealty to the cause. That should be resisted. So whenever you're in a meeting and someone announces their pronouns, you should say, I don't think we should be bringing our personal ideology into the workplace. When they say you should sign off an email with it, you should object vociferously, because you might say, oh, it's just being polite, but that's a slippery slope. That's when you're basically saying, okay, now we're going to make religious declarations at work, are we? Okay, well, why aren't we declaring our fealty to Baal at the start of every meeting? Why aren't we doing that? You know, we may as well. You know, so I think that's going to be, it's these little acts of resistance that make all the difference, I think. And activists are trying to normalize that idea through the use of pronouns, through exactly what you've just seen, the flags flying up.
I could use your advice on a way to think about this particular thing, which is I have a longtime friend of mine I haven't seen in a while, transitioned as an adult a long time ago.
Yeah.
I can no longer bring myself to use the pronouns of the new identity. Happy to use the name. In fact, I referenced this person at one point, and one of my staff said, "Yeah, I noticed that you'll say the name,
yeah,
won't say she,
yeah,
because it was a he. This person was a man, is still a man.
Yeah.
Am I being? Is that? What's your take on that?
Well,
Should I not? I'm not necessarily asking for your permission.
No.
But I need to. My inclination is, if I give she, I'm acknowledging something that's false. And that now feels, in a way it didn't feel before, like that is like the line I should not cross.
That's very interesting. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is...
This is harder core than Jordan Peterson has said in the past.
Yeah. There is... okay, when we talk about the trans community now, we are conflating all manner of things. We're bringing in cross-dressers, transvestites, people who are sexually aroused by the thought of themselves dressing as a woman.
Autogynephilia.
Autogynephile. We are bringing in fetishists. We're bringing in all sorts of people, non-binary. All of that is all now trans, right? But at the core of it is actually what we used to call transsexuals. And this is a very, very small minority of people who, for whatever reason, whatever psychological reason, feel they must present in the standards of the opposite sex, the traditional way of the opposite sex, either through dress and modes of speech, but sometimes through surgery, that they cannot be psychologically content with their life. They can't live unless they go through that very expensive, very painful surgical procedure. We used to call those people transsexuals, and we were very tolerant of that because there's a sympathy, there's an understanding that you're dealing with a human being who is doing something that isn't easy, at a time where it wasn't fashionable, remember?
No. Oh,
right?
no. It was,
You know,
I mean, it was more fashionable for this person than their politics, which is right wing,
Right.
and free market.
but that's, yeah, right, okay.
So it was like that this person happened to say, like, oh, it was easier to say I'm a woman than to say I'm not a Marxist anymore.
Yeah.
in academia.
But is it fair that we are conflating those individuals with some guy with a beard and a penis who wants to go on a lesbian dating site to get women? Because that's what we're doing. So we have to be very clear. I think we should maybe bring back the word transsexual. That would help. Remember that the vast majority of people who identify as trans never have surgery, never change their genitals. So, you know, those are the men who want to go into women's prisons, etc. So now, I think that's why I also believe the LGBTQIA plus movement has been a disaster for transsexuals, for trans identifying individuals, some of whom I know who hate all of this. That's the other thing to remember. So it's not a coherent community. And the reason is
there's a person in I think they're in Austin, Blair White.
Blair White is a good example.
Yeah.
You go back 15 years or so ago, most people I know had no problems with using the pronouns that a transsexual used, because we recognized that for this person to be happy in the world, they had to be treated as though they were a woman. But that did not mean that we thought they were, and that did not mean that they thought they were, right? This was simply a kind of a white lie to enable someone to be happy. I don't see a problem with that. Okay, now, but what's happened now, and I know increasingly friends of mine are very rigid about the pronouns thing, and they will only use it for biological sex because now there are greater principles at stake. Now
that is how it feels to me.
That's right. So actually, I have full sympathy with people who say, I will only ever use pronouns to denote biological sex. Even if it's a friend, even if it's someone who's vulnerable, I will only do that. But there are also circumstances where that can't be the way to go. I mean, if you are, I don't know, working as a social worker with someone who has suicidal thoughts, who is, you know, who you wouldn't just say, okay, I'm going to use the biological pronouns, even though it's going to set you off again. It's going to, like, there are reasons why people use these pronouns. Close friends, for instance, Julie Bindel, the feminist activist, mentioned on a podcast recently, she has an old friend who is a transsexual, someone she's known for decades.
And I think this my friend would qualify as this.
And Julie Bindel says she will still call him her. Because what are you doing in that situation where this person hears you refer to them as he? It's upsetting. And you don't want to upset your close friends. You don't want to upset people that you love. But I reject this idea that by doing that, you are lying to people. It's not a lie. Everyone knows. Everyone involved in that situation knows that you don't think that person has changed sex. So my view of it is, for me, if I'm talking about a close friend who has transitioned in private, two people who are not gender ideologues, not in public, not in the media, I would be happy to use the pronouns that person wants. If I'm reporting in the media, as I do on my show on Sundays, I will never do that. I'm going to talk about biology. I hate the BBC's policy of referring to rapists and male murderers as she when they're men, right? So there was one in December about a sexual predator who abused or at least was complicit in the abuse of a 4-year-old. And the whole article talked about her and she and a woman. Not once did it even mention that this was someone who identified or was trans, or just she all the way through. And you had to look at the photo, the evidence of your own eyes, and you saw, no, this is a bloke, this is a man. That's lies. That's the media lying to you about someone, all right? It's imperative that the media does not misreport the truth for ideological reasons. The BBC is very ideologically captured, by the way, but lots of media outlets are. So I think when it comes to the pronoun debate, we also have to make our own choices about how we use language. That's really, really important. I've had run-ins with gender-critical feminists who are very extreme about this, who have instigated pile-ons against me for expressing the view that I've just expressed, the same view that Julie Bindel has, the same view that a lot of feminist activists have, which is that in private, with my friends, that's my business. And I've had a lot of gender-critical feminists smear me, send me abuse, lie about me to other people to try and damage my reputation. They're behaving like trans rights activists. It's all very well coming up and saying, I disagree with you for this reason. I think we should always use pronouns for biology. And the reason is that it's a slippery slope, or whatever the argument might be. Present that argument. But once you start throwing abuse to try and shut me up, then I'm not having that. And so this is a problem that's across the board. So I think it's about your individual choice and your individual conscience. I think you've obviously made a choice in terms of how you're going to refer to people.
I want to remain an open-minded person that is always trying to better understand how to live a good life and be someone that strives towards being better.
Yeah.
So this notion that I will put my flag in the ground on these issues at this time is not true. I can't do that. I'm trying to learn.
Yeah. Well, I would say there's a difference between referring to a close friend than referring to, say, Adam Graham, who decided when he was convicted for double rape that he would become Isla Bryson, and was accommodated in a female prison in Scotland while they were working out whether he was a risk to inmates. He's a double rapist. You don't need a risk assessment. He's got male genital. You don't need a risk assessment. Don't put rapists in women's prisons. It's as simple as that. It's the thing that probably brought down Nicola Sturgeon in the SNP. But I'm not going to call a rapist by their preferred pronouns. I don't think a rapist deserves my courtesy, frankly. And also, it's important when you're talking about that to be truthful and accurate in reporting. So no, I think there's a distinction to be made between old school transsexuals who you know on a personal level and this larger debate that's going on about fetishists who want to identify into women's spaces for their own sexual gratification. Those are poles apart.
Early in our conversation, you said you still consider yourself Catholic. The Catholic Church doesn't recognize your ability as a gay man to have a sexual life. Basically, it's like the position of the Catholic Church is, nope, you can exist, you can be, we love you, but don't do any of that. Don't engage in homosexual activity. How do you square that with not just rejecting? It's an important part of life to be sexuality is an important part of life. How do you
because
confront that?
Because there are all sorts of debates going on within the church, and there always have been, even with our current Pope, who seems to send different messages about this issue on a day-to-day basis, as far as I can see. Theologians have wrangled over this and have not settled the matter. And there are all sorts of ways in which Catholics agree with elements and don't agree with other elements. Transubstantiation is a very good example. I think a majority of Catholics don't actually believe that the bread is turning into flesh. Well, that's not what the Catholic Church says. But, so I think there is room for discussion. I think Catholicism as well is something that is, it's not just about one particular aspect of doctrine. It's broader than that. And I think if you come from that sort of family, as I did, especially Northern Ireland, let's be honest.
There's some history there.
It's not as easy just to say, I'm not Catholic anymore. I'm not, just because I disagree with one point of doctrine. I don't think that's coherent, because there's so many other points of doctrine that most people will disagree on. So I don't see why that should be one that you should pick. Also, there are so many gay priests.
That is definitely true. I
spoke to a priest who, he actually defected to the Church of England. But he told me that when he was in the seminary, most of the trainee priests were gay and actively gay.
This is something his name is escaping me at the moment. The sort of conservative gay writer here in the States.
Andrew Sullivan?
Andrew Sullivan has written about what's going on in the Vatican and the extent. There also seems to be woeful levels of sex ed.
Right, okay.
So there's lots of problems going on.
Yeah.
It's a human institution. It's shot through with problems.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I could say, I'm not Catholic because I'm gay, but I don't feel that way. It would be a lie. It would be I'm not one who is certain about my faith or belief anyway. I just don't know. I've got a big question mark there. but I still have something innate because of my upbringing, which is not something you can just shed. You know, I think that's the best way to answer that.
This has been a very serious conversation.
I know I should have put more jokes in. but you know,
It's all my fault. It's guilty as charged.
No, but I do this all the time. I do these interviews where people say, "Oh, he's so serious." But I did do a stand-up set last night, and you saw, and people laughed.
It was quite funny.
So there you go. So I can do that. I just choose not to when it comes to these conversations.
One of the things that is so interesting is that for all our problems and for all of our purveying of nonsense,
Yeah.
especially to our friends in the Anglosphere, we still have this robust, by comparison, protection of freedom of speech.
Yeah.
It is still horrifying and sounds like a lie to hear that people get arrested for tweets in the UK. But this has happened, right? This isn't like a lie.
No, it's a verifiable fact.
Like,
So you know that
you can get canceled or whatever. You can I even think, yeah, you can get canceled from certain things here,
Yeah.
privately, but the cops aren't going to show up.
well, there's a number of issues. The UK has hate speech laws. You don't have that. You have the First
No.
Amendment.
Yes.
So we have hate speech laws encoded in two forms. One of them is the Communications Act, and the other is the Public Order Act. And in the Communications Act, if you post something online that is deemed grossly offensive, you can be prosecuted for that. That's happened many, many times. We also have we have a thing among the UK police called a non-crime hate incident, where police will investigate and record non-crime if it potentially they think could lead to crime. So
you have Minority Report pre-crime as a thing on the books.
Exactly. And it's very, you know, there've been over, since this was instituted by the College of Policing, it must be around 2013, around that time, there've been over 250,000 non-crimes recorded by police in England and Wales. So they're doing it a lot. The Scottish police...
if you're going to report on a non-thing, you could probably do that all day long and not leave your house.
Well, right, exactly. It doesn't make any sense.
Hey, no crime yet.
But it's a thing and it matters because, you know, so I wrote a book called Free Speech and Why It Matters. The first chapter is about this. It's about a police officer called Harry Miller who retweeted a poem which a trans activist found offensive. And the police turned up and said, why have you retweeted this poem, etc.? What's going on? That's hateful. And he said, has a crime been committed here? And they said, no. And he said, well, why are you here? And they said, well, we needed to check your thinking. That was the phrase the police officer used. Now, Harry Miller is an ex-cop. And he's a cop from the old school before the College of Policing started all this nonsense. But
In the before times.
This shows what happens when this ideology captures even the police force. Police in the UK are trained to monitor offensive speech. There was even a police billboard in Manchester, in Merseyside, where there's a photo of them in front of this electronic billboard where it says, being offensive is an offence. And this was something that was designed, printed up by the police, agreed on. They clearly think it is their role, but they apply it selectively. They don't arrest trans activists who are sending death threats to women online, but they do arrest gender-critical feminists who misgender people online. That happens quite a lot. So
I am going to come to your house and kill you, you turf, goes un...
Yes, because there's a bias within the police force, exactly. Now, so you have...
America.
Right, okay.
We still are number one.
Well, look... We need to get rid of we need to repeal hate speech laws. They're not just in the UK; they're across Europe. There's a book by Paul Coleman called Censored, which reproduces facsimiles of all of the various hate speech laws across Europe. What you'll notice is that no one can agree on what hate means. The Irish government is trying to pass a bill at the moment that is one of the most draconian hate speech bills. They can confiscate your computer or your phone if you have material that could potentially cause upset or offence to someone else. If you've got an offensive meme on your phone, that will justify the police seizing your phone. If this goes through, it's going to be an absolute disaster, and it will be weaponized against feminists in particular, people saying that there are only two sexes, which there are. The Scottish hate crime bill, which went through on April the 1st, that sounds like a joke, but it did, that basically can criminalise opinion, matters of opinion. It can even criminalise things you say in the privacy of your own home if those things are likely to stir up hatred. It's a real problem with the UK. It's also one of the reasons why the woke movement has flourished in the UK, because we don't have the buffer of the First Amendment. And so, you know, given that the woke movement is an authoritarian movement that believes in censorship, we have this problem. There was a guy who went to prison for quoting a joke about Madeleine McCann on his Facebook page that he didn't even write. He took from a website. He served prison time for that. There was someone else who was sent to prison, or at least was prosecuted for a sick joke, which was mocking the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire. And, you know, I saw that video and I thought it was horrible.
How is Ricky Gervais not already? How are you and Ricky Gervais not sharing a prison cell together?
Because they say that there's a distinction between comedians and just people. I think they're sort of kind of implying that you need a kind of license to do it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If they were applying these standards fairly, I would be handcuffed, and so would Ricky Gervais, and so would Jimmy Carr, and but they don't apply these things fairly. The closest they've come to it is the police investigated or looked into Joe Brand, who's a comedian who made a joke about throwing battery acid at a politician, but it was a joke. You might say it was an unpleasant joke, but it was still a joke, and the police had no business getting involved in that. But they do. I mean, the Scottish police this year were being trained on how to deal with offensive comedy, which is why we took I've got a night called Comedy Unleashed.
Yes.
We took that to Scotland on April the 1st to mark the day of the new hate crime bill coming in, to tell some offensive jokes and see if the police would arrest us, and they didn't, which I'm glad about, obviously. But it was a principle. It was the point. And then, of course, there's the case of Marcus Meekin, who I think you know about, the Count Dankula case. Do you know about that one?
I don't.
Okay, Marcus Meekin is a YouTuber who goes by the name of Count Dankula. Back in the day, about 5-6 years ago, he had 8 followers on YouTube. He now has over 1 million because of all this. So it's worked out quite well for him. He made a joke video in which he taught his girlfriend's pug dog to do a Nazi salute whenever it heard the phrase Sieg Heil. So you can see the dog in the video, and he's saying Sieg Heil, and the little puppy is raising its paw. He trained it. Quite a lot of effort. He also trained it to react excitedly to the phrase "gas the Jews." Now, obviously, well, you're laughing, you see, so obviously there's humour to it.
There is humour. It is gallows humour, but
Sure.
It is humour.
But as you know, the joke is predicated on the idea that he's turning his girlfriend keeps talking about how cute the dog is, so he's going to turn it into the most evil thing imaginable, which is a Nazi, right? So the joke,
actually, yeah, the broader like plot is hilarious. Oh, you love this pug? I'm going to convert it to Nazi.
Yeah, and that's what he did. While she was away, he trained it to be a Nazi. Now, there's even a clip in the video where the dog is seen watching Adolf Hitler giving a speech on the screen. It is funny and it's silly, whatever, but the joke is predicated on the idea that Nazism is a unique evil. It is an anti-Nazi joke. The Scottish police arrested him. It went viral, you see. 2 million people saw it. Not one complaint, because people got that it was a joke. Not one complaint. I mean, you may as well arrest Mel Brooks for Springtime for Hitler. There was not one complaint. They trawled. The police actually went to the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities and said, "Do you find this video offensive?" And they said yes. And then they said, "Great, now we can arrest him." So they arrested him. They put him through the trial. He was found guilty in a court of law. He now has a criminal record for a joke about a pug. That's, he didn't pay. Well, they just fined him 800 quid, which he refused to pay. So they just took it out of his bank account against his will. But that's what we're dealing with.
He would be more guilty of something if he was actually someone that bred pugs, because they're just terribly.
Well, there we go.
They're like a genetic abuse of the animal.
What I love about this as well is, like, do the police think that if he's genuinely a neo-Nazi, that he thinks the best way to radicalize people is through the medium of pugs? Is that what they think? This doesn't make any sense. And by the way,
animals go viral on the interwebs.
Yeah, but jokes at the expense of Nazis aren't going to. And no neo-Nazi watching that video is going to think, "Oh, that's good. I like that. He's mocking the Führer. That's great." No, of course not. And this guy, I mean, he did blow up. He's now got a career thanks to it, actually. But I mean, come on, that's the UK for you, though. We do have these hate speech laws. They are applied. We don't have a constitutional protection in the way that you do. So we are vulnerable to that kind of thing. But I'm not worried about it because they haven't yet gone after... Although, that said, the comedians have been reported to the police, and comedians have had their shows cancelled due to public pressure. That's quite common now. That's happening more often now. But I'm not worried about getting arrested, because I don't think any police officer in his right mind would arrest me for a joke I tell on stage. Well, we'll see, won't we? It's famous last words.
Right, right.
Maybe, but also I'm not really an offensive comedian. I don't think I wouldn't naturally, wouldn't cut.
Okay. If you say so.
Okay, some people disagree. I don't think I am particularly. There are comedians who are much more offensive than I am.
I usually ask my guests how they see their role in the American story, because this is Dad Saves America, and that is about the role we play as men in promoting things that hopefully make the country a better place. You are not an American, so I will instead ask you, what is your advice to us here to make this country better?
That's a big question, and I'm bound to look. I think your viewers might not look favourably on a foreigner telling you how you should run your country.
Have at it. Or maybe let me rephrase. How about this? What do you hope America keeps? Is it the First Amendment? Is it our freedom of speech? How would you say, what's the best of America in your eyes as a former ruler, as the genetic dynasty of our former overlords?
The best thing about your country is your constitutional republic is the fact that you built in guarantees, that the founding fathers built in these guarantees to protect freedom, and that it generally works. That's great, and you have a system which seems to work until the High Court, the Supreme Court becomes ideologically captured, or until the executive becomes ideologically captured. Then you're in trouble. But you have these things you have a scaffolding in place to protect it, and I think it works. I think that needs to be preserved. I think you need to resist anyone who says you need to amend the First Amendment or carve out exceptions for hate speech. I think the notion of hate speech ought to be abolished as a concept. And I think you need to ensure that this ideology is not promoted as though these things are uncontested beliefs, uncontested facts. They are highly contested beliefs and should not be being promoted by the government, of all things. I also think what you could do is not vote in an octogenarian who confuses Zelensky with Putin. I think, today he introduced him on the stage as President Putin. That's not good. Don't have that man in charge. But I'm no fan of Trump either. Why not have, I don't know, non-extreme, sensible politicians who can disagree without throwing insults and Well, look, it's the same in our country, by the way.
I know. I was going to say, I'm not sure where we look to for good role models.
No, I know.
Not to the UK, not to France.
No, exactly. I told you. I mean, I'm not really in a position to preach because we've got a prime minister who thinks that 0.1% of women have penises. He said it explicitly. He said no. He was trying to be all sensible. He said no. I think 99.9% of women don't have a penis, but no, 100% of women don't have a penis. This is pretty rudimentary stuff, and that's our prime minister. So I'm not really in a position to talk. But I don't think, when I saw that debate between Trump and Biden, I don't think you're sending your best. I don't think that represents, adult politics. It looks ridiculous. Although Trump was very restrained in that debate, uncharacteristically so.
He benefited from the rules akin to putting children in a crate. He's like, okay, I have to play within the crate, I guess.
think he just took advice. I think he realized that he didn't need to draw attention to the problems that Biden has because it's very, very obvious. I think the other thing you could do is avoid the corruption, of really not open that Pandora's box of allowing one political candidate to imprison the other. The idea that you can just elevate a misdemeanor that's beyond the statute of limitations to a felony and criminalize your opponent, and that the Republicans aren't going to do that when they get into power, because you've just opened a whole can of worms. I mean, how about... Yeah.
You could say it's a threat to democracy.
Yeah, quite, exactly. So I think maybe go back to basics. Maybe go back to what the founding fathers had in mind. That would be the best way. But I don't know. I mean, it's your country, but it's quite important that America stands firm, because it is the bastion of freedom, and you do have that First Amendment. And I would love for us to have a codified constitution. We don't, which is part of the problem.
Andrew Doyle, thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
Thank you very much.
Now it's time for.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was. Damn it. Done. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to be showing here. Huh? Okay. Oh, okay. Well, that's it, guys. I'm done for another day. Well, I'm not done actually. I will be on Harvest Reflex at Speaker's Corner within a few hours. So keep your eyes peeled for that. If you guys are still about in the chat, thank you everyone for showing up. I saw a lot of great people in the chat. Suvi, Ollie, or the new UG. Cheeky Chops, who else? The give the gospel of Jesus, Mr. Big Nose of London. I don't usually call out Lo Wang. Lo Wang is a bit of a scum. Suzul, my gorgeous darling Suzul. I hope I see you later today, my love. Yeah, did I send Cheeky Chops already? Who else? Jay Rillo. I don't know if Jay Rillo's still with us. And the Lodger. Big up everyone in the chat. Thank you so much for coming. Let's see the results of the poll. And the poll is... What do we have? We have 7% gay, 14% fairy, 35% straight, but the winner with 42% unicorn. Most people are unicorns in this chat. I'm glad, because yes, you're special. You're a special little unicorn. Okay, that's it, boys and girls. We are done for now. Catch me. What's it called? Catch me at Speaker's Corner on Harvest Reflex. Go there, subscribe now, and I will be live hopefully by at least 1 o'clock. But I don't think I'm going to be there too long because there's another event happening in Parliament Square. I may go there. I'm not entirely sure actually whether I should actually even just go there and skip Speaker's Corner entirely. It is going to rain today, boys and girls, so it's going to be miserable. We'll see how it all unfolds. All right, guys. I will catch you all laters. Peace out.